Silence only makes violence grow. Silence only fosters aggression and pain. What you will hear in these stories are the silent pain that families experience when the violence and aggression comes not from a stranger or an adult, but from their very children. What would you do if your child of love, the one you dedicated your life to, the one you would do anything for, the one you would shield from any hurt, is the one that's attacking you with words, fists, and any object they can find? What would you do when the greatest source of your love is also the source of your greatest pain? What would you do if no one believes you? If no one would listen? What would you do if you're given only two choices? Send your child away, abandon them, or keep them with you and suffer the wrath of their anger in silence? What would you do if all you have to deal with, everything you have to deal with it alone? Misunderstood, alienated, forsaken by the very community that once supported you. Your family, relationships, friendships in turmoil, and no one blaming anyone other than you. You are a bad parent. You are not doing enough. You are failing. What would you do? The stories you're about to hear are not of families and parents that abandoned their child. They didn't touch their baby, nor did they ever give them anything other than love. In fact, they've given up so much: careers, family, friends, so they can brave the storm the child creates in the hopes that one day they can bring their child out of the darkness of hate and into the light of their hearts. These are not stories of cowardliness, but rather of unrelenting bravery. These are not stories of hurt, but rather of hope. The trust that one day we can all help them together, that we as a collective community can be there for them to weather the storm. We may never understand the horrific pain they've had to experience every single day. I know I don't. Yet by listening to this podcast, perhaps we can hold these families in our hearts and prayers, sharing their reality in our world, to one day become a voice of support and love for those families living with child violence and aggression as they work to love their children no matter how hard the world gets. Thank you for being here. Thank you for showing them why they matter. Thoughts and ideas are everywhere. They permeate our work, our homes, our world. Some help, others confuse. Yet what we really want, what many of us really dream of, is the one real thing we have in common. We all want to speak, to express ourselves in whatever way we choose. This is my safe space for you, just for you, to express your views absent of any judgments or opinions. I just want to be there for you, to hear what you really have to say and embrace your truth, your reality, your experience. Many of the families featured in this podcast belong to the Adopt for Life network of families. Adopt for Life is Ontario's association for kin, customary care, and adoptive parents and caregivers. It's a community of people with lived experience
that strengthens and empowers parents and caregivers to achieve permanency for children so that they can reach their full potential. They believe that all adoptive, kinship, and customary care parents and caregivers have the right to advocacy, support, guidance throughout their lifelong journey. They're not just looking to help kids stay in homes, they're looking to help kids stay in forever homes. What I really love about them is that they believe that all adoptive parents, kin, and customary caregivers have the right to advocacy, support, and guidance. It's a critical thing because there isn't a lot of support out there. And as you'll see with this podcast, for families living with children, violence, and aggression, there's even less support. So while child violence and aggression is an issue that belongs to all families, the adoptive community is more vulnerable to CVA, as many children have faced untold trauma before being placed in a forever home.
So our daughter came to us at 13 months. And initially it was a scenario, we were foster parents. So she was coming to us as a placement. And in that first conversation we had on the phone, when I got the call, it was very much a temporary thing. They were thinking maybe 2 to 4 weeks, and there apparently had been an adoption plan in place. And so I really went into it thinking like, okay, this is just going to be, I'll be what I need to be for while she needs me, and then, see her off to whatever the next stage was going to be for her. And then that changed really, really quickly. That had been just some misinformation from BioMom and just inaccuracies, I guess, and maybe some of it was lost in translation between workers and bio family and that kind of thing. But about 3 weeks into her placement with us, we became aware that we could put in our intention to adopt her if we wanted to. And that was like, no brainer. We went home from that meeting. I wrote a letter of intent and sent it, and that was it. So the whole process took about 18 months altogether, which we were told was pretty quick, all things considered, because we did have BioMom agreeing to this, and she said in front of the judge that she was not going to be able to continue to care for her, and that she would hope that we would. And so we had a lot of things going in our favor, and so it was just sort of the regular hoops and that kind of thing that come up. There was some paternity stuff that was a bit of a roadblock for a while, but never really came of much. And so then her adoption was final in August of 2008, and yeah, from there it was pretty amazing. I mean, I remember thinking when it was official, I remember having such a huge sense of relief, but I hadn't realized that I was so worried, because all along I kept sort of appeasing our workers and they kept saying, okay, I'm so sorry it's taking so long, or I'm sorry about this. And I didn't care because she was with us. Like, we had her. So it was just sort of like, that was just a minor detail to me, I thought. But then on our court date, it was like, wow, no, when they said, we declare you a forever family, I was a mess. I couldn't even, and it totally took me off guard. I was not expecting. It felt like, okay, we're just going to go that day and make it official, big deal. But I guess it was a big deal.
It's funny.
I think I must have been.
It's funny. Sorry, I apologize to interrupt.
Yeah.
It's funny. It's making me emotional as well. Just going through that.
Yeah, I think, and maybe it was like I was guarded that whole 18 months and tried not to think about it a lot. And then when it finally happened, it was like, I felt it that day for sure. Yeah, and then we went on to, I was actually expecting our middle kiddo at that court date. So our family grew, and when my daughter was about 4 years old, that's when things really started to present themselves as indicators of bigger things. And I had always worked with children and families my whole life. And so I used to describe her as sort of your typical toddler or your typical preschooler, but up a few notches.
Yeah.
And it was really interesting between my husband and I, because he had not had a ton of, I mean, our daughter made him a dad, so it was his first experience, as far as parenting and trying to guide kids through those changes and tantrums and things that toddlers will have.
Hmm.
Um, but he had me being like, this is not really, sort of typical. Or so yeah, she was about 4 when we started to engage in some community mental health youth services stuff, um, which was my first taste of how frustrating that was going to be.
Yeah.
It was so clear so soon that they had very limited resources, and I constantly heard things like, "Well, you're doing everything we would tell you to do, so good luck," like,
No.
you know. Um, and so when we had our first diagnosis of reactive attachment disorder, she was 4, and so I just sort of set out to, what was going to be, who could I tap into that was like the best of the best for attachment stuff? And that's how I tumbled upon Daniel Hughes and Sandra Webb and Coburg. And we were only 40 minutes from her, so I thought I hit the jackpot there. And we worked with her for years, um, and we learned a lot, and ultimately sort of hit a wall with that resource as well, in the sense that we just didn't really feel like we were getting any further. We were still continuing to go and do the visits, and we would have the talk therapy and some play therapy and that kind of thing. But we weren't really getting anywhere, and I could feel that I was like losing ground. Like things were progressing with her, but I wasn't filling in the gaps as far as the resources that needed to catch these things that were happening. So I think every special parent will say that, like, it's several full-time jobs, right? Like you're once she entered the school system, that was a full-time job
Yes.
to teach them as far as what we needed them to be for her, not what the system had or what the school board had to
Yeah.
offer. We just, I was in the school weekly talking about that. And it just so happened that the year she started school was the first year they did 5 full days of kindergarten. She was one of the pilot schools for that program. And um, so she started 5 full days, but I immediately, the first day, said, we're not going to subscribe to this. Like, it's going to be, this is kindergarten. So she might be here 5 days. She might not be. It'll be to depend on what she needs. And,
Yeah.
and so I think because of my own experiences growing up in the school system, my parents had that approach with me too, where it was very much like, my daughter doesn't learn the way you might teach, so this is what you need to do. Not sort of, they never made me conform to the way my teacher wanted to teach, and so I knew becoming a parent, I was going to want to advocate for my kids the same way,
Yes.
um, and just sort of educate the people that were educating my children on how to be the best they could be for them.
Yeah.
And so that was a big full-time job. And then just trying to access those resources of other, whether it was in the community or even outside our community, trying to find other families. That's how I tripped upon Adopt for Life too, and just searching for what we could put in place to build this team for her.
Yeah.
And as she grew, everything grew. Her needs grew, her behaviors, her all of those things just continued to get bigger and bigger, leading up until she was 12 when we had our first real violence and real self-harm and um, multiple threats to other family members within the home and that kind of thing. Um, she had her first stay in a crisis center when she had just turned 12, and then that was the catalyst for us having her removed from the home. Um, it was very much a crisis scenario. It was nothing that we would have ever thought we would find ourselves in that situation. I mean, I spent so many years talking about how um, our situation wasn't about giving up. It was just about needing to find the right people. And so multiple times over the years, calling our CAS where we had our adoption, and hearing them say things like, "There's really nothing we can do unless this is an adoption breakdown." Multiple conversations where it was like they were like prodding me to say those words. To the point where one time I was on a conversation and I was just sobbing, and I said, "Is that what you need me to say? Do you want me to say those words? Because I'm not going to, because that's not what
Right.
this is."
Yeah.
And the worker on the other, like I multiple times called and did an intake for child safety concern for the other children in my home.
Hmm.
And it was like they couldn't figure out what do you mean? And I was like, well, this is a scenario that is not unique. Like, I know other families are in this position and we need help, but because the framework of so many of these services are built on people giving up, or are built on wearing people down so to nothing that they just can't anymore, and it's like a surrendering because you're just so depleted. And CAS just never really understood us or me or our family, because that was never what I was saying, and I would never say that. And even when we did have to engage and have her in foster care for a short period of time, um, I just kept saying that this is not a breakdown. This is a breakthrough, and you all should pay attention, because what I'm about to create for my daughter is what so many other families need.
Absolutely.
And it's possible. It's not impossible. It's just like the resources need to be redirected. People need to be educated on the fact that no adoptive parent wants to let their babies go. It's not like we didn't go into this thinking, yeah, I'll do this for 8 years and then I'll tap out. That's not, like, nobody does that, like, it was an excruciating climb to become a mom. Why would I just, like, I'm not giving up on that, and I'm not giving up on her. But it seemed like I was speaking another language, like they couldn't even get it through their heads. So,
Why do you
so
think so? Why do you think, apologize to interrupt,
yeah,
why do
no,
you think that's the case? Why did they want you to give up the child versus, from your perception, versus
yeah.
hang on? Because they seem
I
to
just
give you
think,
only two choices, right? They seem to give
yes,
you either,
exactly. Yeah,
either you suffer in silence by
yep,
yourself, or
yes,
you take our resource, give up your child, and we'll take care of it.
yes, exactly. Yeah, and it was interesting for me to learn that the same would have been if there was a biological connection. So that piece even wasn't, like, it wasn't even that, because it, in my sharing of our story and using social media platforms trying to bring attention to this, lots of people asked me that. They said, well, what if she was biologically yours? Like, is that a thing? Is that why? And honestly, any family that was presented with the same hurdles and challenges, biologic, it wouldn't matter. If you went to CAS and said, I need help with my kid, and you went through several different, resources, and it got to the point where, like we were at, where the choice was, we relinquish our parental rights or we take her back.
Yeah.
And that was not possible. And so I think, to answer your question, I think it really is just about educating on how many people are in this position. And I think it's just about, like, these workers come into CAS or other organizations, and they are given what they are given, and it's sort of a blood from a stone situation, right? Like, I've had fantastic workers over the years who've, cried with me and wanted to be able to do more for me and with me, but it's like, well, we can't. This is what we have. And so I
Mm.
think that's really what it is. They come into it with, like, okay, so you have this scenario, this is your answer. You have this scenario, this is the direction. Yeah, and if you don't fit into that, much like the school system or any system,
Yeah.
then people don't know what to do with that. There isn't, so it's families and organizations like this that need to tell people what is needed and what needs to happen and how to do it, and surprise them with how really relatively easy it would be to do,
Yeah.
especially if it was a redirection of resources, like for an organization like CAS, if resources were redirected to helping families and not making it such a, I mean, it's harder to get respite, at least in our experience. It was harder to secure things like respite or anything like that than it was to get a mortgage, or, like, like, it's just like you have to go through,
I'm
I
laughing,
don't
but
know
it's
what.
not funny. I'm laughing.
I know, right? I know. It's
Not
like,
funny at all.
it's just crazy. So, and when you're already dealing with families who are so exhausted, and then you're like, okay, here's this, fill these out, this like stack of whatever, and you might get approved. So spend 45 hours filling that out and send it in and get doctors and unicorns to sign it, and then you might get approved. Like, it is just
Wow.
ridiculous. It is totally ridiculous. So,
Mhm.
but I think that's really all it is. I don't think any of it is brain surgery or rocket science. It's so simple. Like kids themselves, their needs are simple, and they just deserve all of us. It shouldn't be a this or that. It should be all of us. And I really, really believe we need to go back to the beginning of the village, and women who have lots of breast milk feed the village. Women who are good at other things, sewing, sew this, whatever. Like we need to go back to that, and so much of that would start with, as you mentioned, breaking the silence around families who are struggling.
Yeah, agreed.
Just
And I
don't be
think,
quiet anymore.
I'm sorry?
Just don't be quiet anymore.
No,
We gotta get loud.
yeah, but I can see why, like what I learned from you was that I could see why there's silence.
Mm-hmm.
Because, I mean, like you said, like we're all parents at the end of the day, biological, non-biological, and I have both.
Yep.
Um, I can't give up my kids. I don't care. So if anyone even remotely threatened, that potentially I could lose my children, I'm just gonna button up. I'm gonna be honest. I'm
Yeah.
gonna button up because I don't want any system to touch my children,
That's right.
right? That's not why I'm coming to a system. I'm coming to a system for assistance to get the tools I need to be able to
Mm-hmm.
deal with the situation. I'm not coming to give up my child. There's no intent
Right.
there. In fact, even just a hint of that just terrifies me to the
Yeah.
point where I'm just going to just be silent. So I
That's
would
right.
be one of the silent parents if I was living through what you went through, right?
Right. Exactly.
And what I found that it was really inspiring in your story was that you found the third option. You
Mm-hmm.
know, you said no to both, right? You said no to the
Yeah.
silence, no to the giving up the child, and you found the third option. And I
Mm-hmm.
think, perhaps, and we could discuss this in a bit, the system needs that
Yes.
third option, right?
Right.
And that third option specifically for CPVA, and that doesn't exist. And maybe based on what you're saying with the workers, if they were presented with, hey, if CPVA do this,
Yes.
right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Maybe then things might improve.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally. Yeah. I think that would be a fantastic start, and really shining a light on how very dangerous it is to create that opportunity where people feel like they need to be silent.
Yeah.
Because if the goal is to always make sure these kids are safe, we have to make sure that their family and their home and their parents are safe to keep the whole world rolling. Like, everybody has to feel safe and protected and cared for and their needs met and all of those things. So CPVA, I'm sure, like, I think it's gonna, the more people talk about it, the more people are going to be uncomfortable at first.
Hmm.
And the real goal with that, I think, would be specifically to just get more people to talk about it and more people to listen, and listen with the intention of action,
Mhm.
not just listen and, okay, then what? So, and it's the parents that will be able to fill in the then what. What do you need to maintain your family and maintain that permanency for your kids and give your kids everything they deserve, and make sure everybody is safe and can move forward together, because it is possible.
Yeah, it is.
So for us, it was just about really, like, sharing. I never stopped talking for months and months and months. If I wasn't talking, I was typing and posting, and it was just about that. And it turned out that for us, we had somebody who was already in our circle who was willing to help us. Um, but I really feel like more like I feel like many families would. I think um, lots of families who are faced with these types of scenarios probably don't even share much with grandparents or aunts and uncles.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, it's super hard to explain, and so often extended family don't see it.
Yeah.
It rarely do these types of scenarios happen at the family picnic.
Mhm.
We're talking about like every evening homework time and like all these
Yeah.
times where these things brew. Um, so yeah, I think it just really starts with that, like inviting your extended family and your community into really talking about what is going on in your family.
Yeah, in fact, many parents, to your point, they actually, that I've spoken to, many families and parents actually go an extra distance to protect
Mm-hmm.
the child from ever, being violent with the extended family, because they don't want to jeopardize that relationship
Yeah.
child. So they ensure that when the child is, let's say they have a family outing planned, and with the extended family, and they feel like their child is not going to do well that day, they cancel it,
Yes.
taking the
Avoid.
risk
Yeah.
of, showing. So they're actually protecting,
Yes.
the behavior, but in the sense maintaining that silence. So that silence is growing, 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 growing. And the
Yes.
distance between whatever support the extended family could give the parents is growing too, because they
Yeah.
literally are totally disconnected,
Yes. Yeah.
from any communication piece,
Yeah. Yeah.
of what's
Totally
happening.
unaware.
Unaware
Yeah.
completely.
Yeah, and that dominoes effect that happens on the rest of the family, that builds resent and builds that space between siblings and between, like, because there was lots of events that, as you say, we would cancel, not even think about going to, or show up for a short period of time and not stay. Like,
Yeah.
so, and then my other children missed out on that. And all of those opportunities that with the right support, everybody could have just thrived and had a fantastic day.
Yeah.
But everybody needs to be in the know, and everybody needs to just get a little uncomfortable sometimes. Like,
Agreed.
you might not like what this looks like, or God, like the amount of times people would say to me, like, I saw you leaving that play group. I'm sorry, like I feel really bad for you. Or and I'm like, don't. Why are you feeling bad for it? Like, we tried, we played, it didn't go well, we left. I left with one kid over his shoulder and one under my arm, and we went home, and
Oh,
it was like, like, don't feel bad about it. Don't look at a parent dealing with that situation and feel sorry for them. Ask what could make that, what how could you help? Like,
yeah.
what could I do? And I do that all the time now. And I don't know if it makes me weird or not, but if I'm at Walmart or whatever and I see a mom or a parent struggling with a tantrum or whatever, I stop and I say, can I help? Like, if she's got another kid, or she, like, lots of times I've taken a baby and give one a bottle while she's dealing with that tantrum. And like,
Nice.
we need to go back to that. We need to go back to not just walking past somebody struggling. And that's in like every avenue, right? Like,
Yeah.
in all corners of the world.
In
Don't just
all
walk
corners of the
past.
world.
Yes. Don't just walk past people struggling. Stop and say, how can I help you?
Yeah, it's such a beautiful message, and it's really resonating with me right now. It's
Yeah.
it's this is not just CPVA. This is not just family violence. This is anything you do in life, at work, at home, walking down the street. Just please help. I mean, it's huge.
Yeah.
And we do a podcast on homeless youth,
Mhm.
and it's just amazing how they seem so invisible to so many people in the world.
Yes.
They're there, they're alone, and they feel invisible until they
Hmm.
get somehow some assistance. But
Yeah.
and the other thing that's really I think relevant and important here to note, we did some digging with StatsCan over family violence, and the kind of family violence that happens, and they categorize it as in so many different ways, but they did have a category for family violence conducted by members of the family.
Hmm.
And this goes back to your point about being silent and why it's important not to be silent. And they found out that in silence, the majority of family violence conducted by someone in the family is by the child,
Wow.
on the parents and on the siblings and on the grandparents. And that just blew me away. I could
Yeah.
not believe it. Is very closely tied to parents and uncles and stuff like that would
Right.
make that would also be abusive.
Yeah.
But it was such a high number that the fact that he could even compare to something like that in Canada alone
is huge, was huge. And for listeners to this podcast, I'll have the reference
Yeah.
that study so you could see it for yourself. Don't take
Yeah.
my word for it, take Stats Canada's word for it. It's a big deal. Staying silent is really, what I would have done, had I had children behaving like that, probably would have been the wrong thing,
Hmm.
but at the same time, it's so difficult, and
Yeah.
it just makes me admire you and what you and the other parents have done, to really speak out and speak up about this, because we have to have, like you said, a village. We have to have some of those parents speak out for those
Mhm.
parents that won't,
Yeah.
that don't feel like they can, that feel like, oh, I'm going to lose my child, I can't risk it. you know
Yes. Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
so critical and important what you're doing.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. I haven't thought about it in recent years, but I remember when our daughter was younger, thinking about all of the months or seasons in my marriage so far that I had like just clung on. It was very close. And I know there's some stats around adoption and divorce and that kind of thing. But just in talking about those stats and thinking about all of the collateral damage, and that's divorce, that's sibling relationship breakdown, like extended family breakdowns, and like it's just it's catastrophic when you start to think about all the ways that it affects, and it is not separate. It doesn't exist in its own entity because it affects everything. Employment, parents who have lost jobs because they're constantly dealing with their kids, or because there isn't anybody else there isn't any other support, there isn't anybody else you can shoulder tap and be like, I need help, like tag you in. um, I designed my whole career for the last decade around being available for my daughter. So that was, I built a business on making sure that I could be available for her
Yeah.
and still contribute to my family's income.
Mhm.
But I know not everybody can do that, and that's not always possible. But I think whenever we're talking about this, it's not a unique scenario, and
No, it's
it's
prevalent.
not yeah, it's
True.
not unique, and it's not something that just happens in its own entity. Like I said, like it affects everything and everyone, and the trickle is far. And
Yeah.
um but I also still feel that the solution is not difficult.
So let's talk about that. I know you've got some ideas and thoughts based on your experience and
Yeah.
your know-how and your expertise. What are some?
Yeah, I think the first thing we have to do is stop pretending that any child who enters the system or goes through even a private adoption where there is breaks in attachment and there is multiple caregivers involved, we just have to stop pretending that that doesn't affect them.
Okay.
Using terms like the
Yep.
transfer of attachment.
Yep.
Um, don't believe in that at all. That's not how attachment works. We know that about brains. That's not, you don't just transfer it. Um, so first acknowledging that like any kid who goes through the system, we need to be prepared and ready in a proactive way, not in a reactive way,
Mhm.
that they need these things in place. We need to talk about attachment with whoever is going to be their primary caregiver. What does that look like? What sort of things can we have in place for education pieces for the caregiver,
Mhm.
and also sort of a checklist of like once they hit a certain age, attachment appropriate displays of behaviors that we should be looking for or noticing if they're not there.
Yeah, I
Um,
like this. Very nice.
yeah,
It's very active rather than passive or
yeah,
reactive.
yeah, and I just think it really just starts with the acknowledging that like I think everybody is just so scared that we say something about these kids that makes them seem broken or damaged,
Mm.
or like nobody wants to talk about an adoptive child like that, or that something could be wrong with them, or but there's nothing wrong with them, there's everything wrong with us. So we need to stop pretending that the situation is just all roses and flowers and happy adoption and transfer attachment, and it's just all so misdirected and damaging. It doesn't serve anybody, particularly the child.
Yeah.
So forgetting about all of that stuff and having people who have the experience and the the ideas for how to move forward in a positive way coming in at the right time. So when parents are doing Pride program, or they're on adoption probation, that period of time, having something in place where there is going to be some conversation about attachment and all the other things that we see commonly in our children, and just giving the information at the time where parents can absorb it, because all of this, like, you're in crisis and here's this pamphlet and here's this pamphlet, like, total, I didn't like, you couldn't even think about what you're making for dinner, never mind absorb a whole booklet on what you should be doing. So the timing has to be when people are in a place of being prepared to receive it, not in crisis. But yeah, I mean, that takes a huge shift in the whole system itself.
Yeah.
I personally would like to just sort of like burn it all down and start right from the beginning,
Mhm.
all over again.
Yes.
Let's just sort of wipe the slate and start over. Just because I think there's that many issues with it. Really, there's just that many resources that are in the wrong spot, and not many people that are just making decisions without talking to the parents that are in the front lines.
Absolutely. And I think it's separating itself from the people that really need to provide input. And I think
Yeah.
in some cases, I think there's also this misunderstanding with what a label can do. And we all agree that labels can sometimes be very harmful,
Mm-hmm.
very dangerous.
Yeah.
But I recall many parents, when researching the subject, and actually in the past when I've been doing work in this area, saying that, if I had just known that my child had this condition,
Yes.
whether I think this one was autism,
Yeah.
or backbone autism wasn't even like known. They didn't even
Right.
know what it was.
Yeah.
And, I would have been able to help them.
Yeah.
If I had known my child had FASD, I would
Yeah.
have been able to at least say, you know what, this is not the fault of my child. This is
Right.
something they're experiencing. And right now, the unfortunate situation is, because we did talk to the Justice Ministry, and is that there's only two sort of categories they have. They have the victim and the perpetrator.
Mm-hmm.
There is nothing else. So
Mhm.
you get into a situation where, as the child gets older, and in some cases, in more extreme cases of CPVA, they start to act out and start to be dangerous, start to light the house on fire, start to really, go after their parents and their siblings, like with knives and guns and all that stuff. They start to, the parents have to call the police eventually. There's just
Yeah.
no choice at some
Yeah.
point, right? And when they do that, um, some parents have actually told me, they said that, the police comes in, and instead of making the situation better, realizes that it puts the child right away into the perpetrator hands,
Yeah.
and now starts to attack my child. So what does the parent do?
Yeah.
The parent
So
jumps
protect the child.
to
Yeah.
protect the child from the policeman. So how
Yeah.
is this working out? This is
Yeah.
not working out. Or in other cases, the child presents perfectly to the police, and next thing you know, who's the perpetrator? Oh, it must be the parent,
Yeah. Because there's
right?
only two choices.
Exactly. So the parent is now doing something. So now let's investigate further, because obviously the victim is the child.
Right.
Right. So there, in any case, it's a lose-lose situation for everyone, right?
Yeah.
And there's really no real way to sort of get through this without some kind of way to identify what is happening. And whether it's CPVA or some other language or some other,
Yeah.
I know there's a lot of good work that Adopt for Life is doing, to kind of put up a consortium to kind of figure out
Yeah.
how we're going to name it, to be respectful to the child, to the parent,
Yes.
to be authentic, to be able to give
Yes.
something to give to the police, to justice, to sort of say you can cleave a model out of this, give it the CSs to say,
Yeah.
you could identify this now, right?
Yeah.
And really extract it from the child, extract the
Yes.
blame from the child and say the child is going
Exactly.
through this. It's not their fault, right?
Yes.
Let's help the child, right?
Right. Yeah. And I think like all those parents you mentioned who, maybe their child has autism or had like anything, I know for me right away, um, I was begging for a label. Give me a label because then I know what book to read and I have my ticket to get her the support. Or so I thought, like that was what I thought was going to happen was like, okay, let's go through these assessments. Let's go, try every avenue until we get some piece of paper that says this is what she is dealing with.
Exactly.
And then that was my ticket to try and so yeah, I mean that's definitely what I've heard from parents all along too, that like I call it whatever you want to call it. She's my kid, and then this is what we're managing. Like so for us parents, it's easy for us to separate it. But I would assume that those parents you spoke to who said things like, if only I had known earlier, or if somebody had said, there's a likelihood that in the future you may have to navigate this, this, and this. I'm certain none of those parents were like, oh, okay, then I don't want to parent this kid anymore.
Yeah.
It's never about that. It's never about that. Like, and I really think CAS is scared of that.
Yeah.
So like if there is that huge, maybe I shouldn't generalize. I feel like that was the case for our adoption and with our local CAS that we work with. I feel very much like there was some wool pulled over our eyes and just some of the procedures were sort of swift and yeah just read that and it was just very and I in hindsight it just seems very much like particularly because we were never able to access any support once the deal was done.
Yeah.
So it very much had that sense of our hands are washed, you're a family now, go deal with it.
Mm-hmm.
But if there had been that transparency and if we had had some expectations of what we were going to be dealing with, she would still be my kid for sure. But we potentially could have had so much more in place for her and us.
Yeah.
So like, again, just talk about the uncomfortable shit. Like, like I don't know why it's so hard and so I don't know, so rare to just hear people just say it like it is.
And I think part of what I'm hearing so far, and I want to hear if this your thoughts on this, is that the big argument is there isn't an identifier, there isn't a label, there isn't a definition, so therefore we can't do anything about it. We may recognize that something is there, but we don't know what this something is. We don't know how to deal with this something. We don't have a language. We don't have a vocabulary. We don't have an official definition, and we don't have an official program. We don't even have money for this, right?
Yeah.
It's not even allocated in our budgets. So, it would make sense to me that, any organization that would look at these behaviors and go, okay, well, this is just a child temper tantrum, or could be just normal child development, whatever it may be. The child obviously is going through trauma, so, they're going to act out in certain ways. We can't label this. It doesn't exist. Right. So why are we communicating this to the parents, the potential adoptive parents? Because we don't know what it is. We don't know if we're communicating something that is real or we're miscommunicating something. Right. So again, I'm not trying to take their sides in that sense, but kind of give that explanation that a lot of people are going to, notice something is there, like you said, but they're going to walk by it because they don't know what to do with it. They don't know how to handle it. And I've seen this in different areas. Why would any human being walk past a child that is homeless? That is on the street. They don't walk by a child because they have no heart. They have no empathy. They have no appreciation for what's going on. Quite the opposite. They just don't know what to do. They just
Hmm.
don't know how to deal with it. And in
Yeah.
a lot of cases, like you said, the solution is very simple, but it's
Hmm.
never been presented. It's never
Right.
been formalized. It's never been integrated,
Hmm.
and therefore people feel paralyzed and just walk by.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. No, it's so true. It really is. Yeah. I keep going back to people just muting themselves, and I think part of that, and part of what you're saying about like people don't know what to do, it also means that we have to acknowledge what we're not doing and what we're not, because we all have so much power. Like imagine if we just all got together one
Oh,
day.
yeah. Amazing.
Like,
Just unbelievable.
yeah, the potential is
Um,
amazing. But when we're talking about these parents who are navigating this, there was a huge, like, I had to swallow big time because I really identify, like, a huge part of my identity was how good of a mom I was and am. So
you are an
it,
incredible mom. No doubt.
so it was like I just had to check that and just be like, okay, so need a lot of help, don't know what's happening here, don't know what's going on. Coming from somebody who used to get calls all the time from parents asking for advice, now don't call me because I need help now. But there's a huge element of that, right? Like it's almost like you have to admit that you don't know what's going on, and you have to accept that people are going to judge you on that,
Yeah.
and you just have to not care, because what's bigger is your kid needs this or your family needs this. But there's a huge part of that where like parents don't want to say that they need help, because being a parent is such a huge part of our personal identity. Like
Mhm.
we're parents forever, that never goes away, and as soon as we become a parent, we are changed forever, and that's
Yeah.
who we are. And so being really transparent and vulnerable to say like, yeah, totally don't know what I'm doing here,
Yeah.
need help, and then not being able to find it
It's
or access
huge.
it,
Yeah.
just so defeating.
Yeah. And that to me is the mark of a very competent parent. And I'll be very honest with you. When you go out and ask for help and know that you're going to take the blows for that,
Hmm.
that's competency. That is
Yeah.
meaning, that's knowing that you're good. You don't have to worry about that. That's check mark, right? And I experienced that when I was younger with my first child. And I had to go to the therapist sometimes to figure out what I should do better with my child. And when I told friends that, they thought, you've got serious issues. You know what I mean? I mean, you could tell it. You could see it in their
Yeah. Yeah.
eyes. They're kind of polite. Some are less polite. Some were less polite. Some
Yes.
were more polite. But all in all, I got the general gist of it,
Yeah.
right? And I'm like, whatever. You don't get it. Okay. One day you'll be a parent, because these are young folk and they hadn't quite
Yeah.
had kids yet. One day
Been
you'll
there,
get
done
it,
that. Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
And, but it's just you have to, because if one of the reasons, for me at least, competency is recognizing what you could do really well and what you need help with,
Hmm.
right? Because you're not afraid, of what you need help with, because what you do really well is really well, right?
Right.
You know what I
Yeah.
mean? You're very
Yeah. Yeah.
confident in that. So it's only those parents, unfortunately, that don't have that confidence in themselves. Maybe they're awesome parents, maybe they're not, but they just don't have that confidence.
Yeah.
Those are the ones I'm really afraid of.
Yeah.
I'm really afraid for, sorry.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm afraid for them that they will not go out and seek help, that they will go out there and just hide and hide and
Hmm.
hide. And I don't care if they're adoptive or not adoptive or
Yeah. Yeah.
biological children. As you mentioned, CVA, is all over the place. It's
Yeah.
not just adoptive. That StatsCan report was not just
Yes.
on adoptive children. That
Exactly.
was on
Yeah.
all children, period.
That's right. Yeah.
So, yeah, I think those are the parents that, unfortunately, I just wonder how many of them are suffering in silence today
Hmm.
and
Yeah.
just can't come out and talk about it.
Yeah. And again, going back to what can we do, if we were providing them with the tools and the connections and the support and the guidance, and people who could advocate for them when they're too tired to even open their mouths, then we could avoid them sitting by themselves in silence. But it has to be uh, a proactive approach. It can't be happening when the police are there or when they are, taking themselves to the hospital because they're done.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. That's fantastic. And so I want to just talk to you just very quickly. I know we talked about your situation. You found a solution with your daughter. What are some of the new sort of happenings that happened since then?
Yeah. Yeah. So our third choice we found in somebody we have known for a long time. Um, Ironically or not, perhaps it was the universe all along, but I met her at a mummy group
Mhm.
when our daughter was a baby and when her son was a baby too. And we also have some other parallels in our life that are associated with the military and careers that way, where you get sort of moved and bounced around, and we just happened to be bounced around the same places for the last decade, and
Mhm.
so stayed in contact. And when I was really pushing our situation and our story on social media, and I had created a petition to try and just bring awareness to the need for a third choice. She came to me and said, this is where I'm at, this is what I'm doing, I'm retiring. And she happened to be also in the process of applying to become a foster parent. This was a goal she had always had. We had talked for many years over the years about her wanting to do things like that, and potentially adopt herself and grow her family that way. And so funny enough, it was kind of a quick conversation. She knew us, we knew her. She knew the situation we were in, and the phone conversation happened. I will always remember it very clearly. It was a Wednesday, and I was on the front porch of our house, and it was pouring rain. And CAS had just called and said, so that timeline we gave you, which at that time was about 30 days, they said, um, that has just been expedited because you've made it very clear that you have no intention of your daughter returning into your home. So there's actually potentially a court date next week for you to stand in front of the judge and relinquish your parental rights. So
Wow.
I said, so that's it, like time's up, that's it. And she said, yeah, unfortunately, my supervisor has said because there is no plan to return to the home, things were just flying ahead. And there was a court date next week. There was a slot for us to slide in there, and we were just to go in there and say those words. And our daughter would have required to be present because she was older than 12. So we would have had to stand there in front of her and in front of a judge and say we were giving up. So again, I said that's not possible. And I truly believe, I really believe it would not have physically been possible. I don't think my mouth would have said the word. Like, I just don't think I would have been able to physically do it. I don't think my husband could have done it. Like, I just don't think it would have happened. So so yeah, it was I sent her a message, and I said, do you have time for a call? And she said, yep. And we were on the phone, and I said, we got to do it. And like I said, we had already some conversation about it, and it was like, okay, just sort of starting to think about what that would look like, and trying to think of it on all angles, like what could potentially be a disaster, what could potentially be incredibly joyful, and like all of those sides of everything. Trying to really go into it not naive. Like, the fact that we needed a third choice in itself means that nothing was perfect. Like it was what it was, and there's no amount of gratitude ever on this earth for her being there when she was, and the way she has been there since. But yeah, so then that was a Wednesday, and I told the workers to let the foster parent know where our daughter was, that we would be collecting her on Friday and bringing her to our third choice. And I really wanted to use some bad words in that conversation. I really wanted to tell them to F off too, but I didn't. I held it together, and just the whole thing so surreal. Like going to the office and collecting our daughter from the office, and then driving her there, and the whole thing was just, and we had all the kids with us. Like we had our other kids with us. We didn't have any family close at the time where we were posted. And so like the drive there, we're talking about, plans for the summer and swimming and camping and like, and the whole time I'm like, this is the most bizarre day of my life, I think. Like, but it was so positive, but still so bizarre. And as we got closer, we turned down one street and there was a sign on the corner that said, "Welcome home," and an arrow pointing to like go that way.
Oh,
And then we turned to the house. The front lawn was all decorated, and her kids were on the front porch waiting for us. And so, I mean, I love to describe it that way, but it was also excruciating. Like again, in the it was beautiful and excruciating. Like it's just, I didn't want her to be there. Like it was all things that I wish I could change and couldn't. But at the same time, in that moment, I had, um, I had made it. I had won at least that battle in the sense of not having to relinquish my parental rights.
mm,
That was a big thing that we never wanted to get to that point. And so yeah, I mean, since then it really has been a village or tribe parenting approach. We all contribute. Our daughter spends time with us. She spends time there. Right now, we're in another sort of transitional. It will be 2 years in August, and we find ourselves again in another bit of a transitional period where we're not really sure what September will look like as far as where everybody will be physically, geographically speaking. um, but we are getting really good at this whole pivot and adapt thing. So,
yes, I can.
so we're definitely, one day at a time, but but it's just so comforting and valuable to know that there's other people on this team, helping her and loving her. And my God, I mean, like she's just our families and our extended families just it's just been like so unique but so natural. Like it's just been like this is what we need. And everybody just so willing to help our daughter. And that, like, that's all you ever want, right? You always want more people to love your kids. And like anybody is welcome in this village as long as you're going to be positive and love them. So yeah.
It's huge. I can't tell you how wonderful this story is to have that third option.
Mm-hmm.
It evokes two feelings in me. Number one is it evokes this feeling of like that the world is a beautiful place and there are beautiful, beautiful people in there. And you know what you and your extended family and the third choice, and the other
Yeah.
mother, did is incredible. I mean, it's beautiful. It's a unique story that I've not heard
Yeah.
before. And I know happens a lot. Since then I've opened my eyes and I'm hearing a lot of this, and wow, it happens with extended family members,
Yeah.
family friends. Like, wow, this happens a lot. This is not
Yes.
just, I mean, obviously a lot, what I mean by a lot, but more than I
Right. Yeah.
expected.
Yeah.
But the other thing it evokes, to be honest, is this feeling of frustration, that you're still not getting the support you need,
Mm-hmm.
and to no fault of your own and to no fault of, your child, and no fault even sometimes to the system.
Mm-hmm.
It's just, there's no support. And,
Yeah.
at the end of the day, we could point fingers left, right, and center. We could say label, no label, this and that. At the end of the day, you have to live with the result. At the end of the day, we're going to finish this call,
Mm-hmm.
and you're going to have to deal with this. And
Yeah.
there's going to be no support.
I really can't even begin to think how many times I have said or wondered how the decision makers sleep at night.
Yeah.
Like because I have trouble, and really for the most part, I mean we're certainly not currently in crisis, thank goodness. And I still will lay awake at night thinking about our situation and other family situations I know, and I'm not in a decision making position yet.
Mm. Yep.
um,
Soon.
to make those changes and to really put the things in place that need to be there for these families. So I truly wonder how, like I think about the workers we dealt with when they were saying that like, yeah, sorry, it's just gotta relinquish your rights. That's the only choice. I just like how do they I mean, I think I know the answer in that situation because they're exhausted too.
Mhm.
And there has to be some element of seen it so many times, like, you know, but everybody we had dealings with kept saying to us, we've never dealt with this before. And I just kept saying, like, yeah, I've got that my whole life. Like, it is what it is. If it doesn't exist, you have to create it. So do you want to create it with me, or do I need to do this by myself? Like, just tell me. And and it was very clear early on that there wasn't going to be anything or any way, because of the way the system is built, that there wasn't another option within the system. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. And I think, that statement that they said we haven't seen this before, makes me wonder what they've been looking at because,
Mhm.
it's extremely prevalent in biological
Yes.
and adoptive children, kinship care everywhere, despite, doesn't matter where. So, the stats show that it's quite the opposite, that we've never seen this before.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
think, again, we go back to that concept where if I don't know what it is, if I am
Yeah.
confused, if I can't identify it, then it doesn't exist.
Right.
And maybe that's the reason why they perceive it that way.
Yeah.
It's only until a parent like yourself comes out and says, you know what, this is really existing, this is
Right.
happening, okay? They go, wait a second, I've never seen that before. Because
Mhm.
they've never seen maybe perhaps parents sticking up for this and
Right.
not being silent about it and not shielding their child from the
Yeah.
system because of this.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, you said it yourself. Like, if all you're looking for is the perpetrator and the victim,
Yeah,
then you can't see
you can't
the
see it.
third choice
There's
in the whole situation. That and silence. Like, if you don't hear it, then how are you supposed to do anything about it?
exactly. So I love this conversation. Thank you so, so much. It
Well,
was
thank you.
so awesome. And I love the idea that you had about about making sure that we try to find a way to be proactive and not reactive,
Yeah.
and it, there's in cleaving the third choice, within the system, for families living with child violence, regardless of, you know
Yeah.
biological, non-biological. um, I think we need to think about being proactive, knowing that, there's a lot of science telling us that if a child has been displaced more than 2 times, there is high evidence that they're going to have developmental trauma, they're going to have some kind of PTSD, they're going to have some kind of reactive attachment disorder trauma, no matter what level it may be, right? So we know they're going to have some kind of behavioral trauma that they're
Mhm.
going to act out because it is so, traumatic for a
Yeah.
child to be displaced,
That's
at
right.
such a young age, so many times. So we don't have to go out there and look for the science. The science is
Yeah.
already telling us this. It's
Yes.
actually showing us physiologically there's
That's right.
parts of the brain, the neocortex, that aren't developed because we fear, we're in constant state of fight or flight. That
That's right.
causes,
Yeah.
because they don't know how to feel secure, or because they don't know if their environment is going to stay the same or is going to change the next day,
Right.
right? They don't feel confident, and they don't believe in adults anymore telling
Yeah.
them, no, 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 you're not going to move from here, because 3 months later they move from there, right?
Yeah.
So that's the science, the physiology, the psychology, everything tells us right away that if you have displacement over a certain number of times, and they've identified 2 to 3 times as
Right.
kind of being that threshold, right?
Yeah.
You're going to have some kind of trauma. So why not
Why not be proactive, look for the signs, start to address them early on,
Mhm.
identify a label, whatever
Yeah,
it may be, whatever that label may be, doesn't matter,
right.
that is holistic, that's beautiful, so that the child doesn't feel like it's them, and the
Mhm.
parent doesn't feel like it's them. The parent already knows it's not their
Yep,
child, and so then they can get the help they need proactively rather
right.
than reactively before it gets worse by the time they get
Yeah.
teenagers, and much more damage can happen.
Exactly. Yeah. And before all the other players come into the game, like hormones and all
Yep,
that stuff,
exactly.
and another big brain change for our kids, right? Like that's a huge time. I think we know way too much about the brain now, right? Like there's even somebody who hasn't been here or doesn't have experience with this. I think the general public know more about the brain than we ever have. And even the provincial governments have put so many efforts and resources and initiatives into this 0 to 6. We know that 0 to 6 is like that's our window
Yeah,
to help these kids as much as we can, provide for them as much as we can, and really focus on developing their brain when it's being developed,
yeah,
not trying to reroute and trying to create new pathways. Let's do it then. So if I mean, obviously, this is if we're talking about children or parents who have children of that age come into their home, or they're in the process of putting themselves out there to welcome a child or children in their home of that age. it's it's to the point, in my opinion, where it's irresponsible, because when you know, then that means you should know better and you can do better. So CAS and other organizations who families like myself deal with over the years, or have included in our family building, are just simply doing a, a disservice, and it's irresponsible in my mind to set families up for this when we know as much as we know.
yeah. I totally agree. I totally agree. And to be honest, in many ways, I see it as if we don't tackle this, if we don't put a label to this, if we don't identify it, we're almost being accountable for it. We're being a
Yes.
culprit to it. We're being associated to it. By
Mhm.
not standing up to it, we're enabling it to
Yes.
happen. And I
Yeah.
think that's dangerous. And I would like to challenge anyone in the system and anyone who's associated with this to say, whether it's a therapist, whether it's a social worker, whether it's justice, whether it's, anybody who's dealing with this, even co-parents and family members, if we're not tackling this, if we're not dealing with this, we're enabling it, and we're
Yes.
part of the problem, right? We're part
Yeah.
of it.
Yes. And it will be our problem at some point. So
Absolutely.
even if right now you can turn a blind eye and figure out some way to sleep at night, eventually these children grow up to be in our society with all of us. So it's again that village idea, right? Like we want these little people to grow into being contributors to our society and be positive contributors.
Yes.
So nobody is going to be immune from the effects of no action now.
Absolutely. And we could see it in society today, right? I mean, so many children, so many young adults just lose it, and you wonder where it happens. But if you go back to a lot of it, a lot of
Yes.
those patterns were already there. They're
Yeah.
already there. Now, I can't give you a number, honestly, or give the public a number of how much of those, came from family violence.
Right.
And we're going to get that research. But
Yes.
I can tell you there's a good chance it's going to be quite a significant number, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
So by tackling this, like you said, as a village, we help the village, right? And by not doing it on the opposite end, we
Yeah.
enable it, and now we only hurt ourselves in the future,
Yeah.
in the long run.
Exactly. Exactly. And again, that proactive approach, and also looking at like so so many of the programs we know of, and so many of the children we know age out of these programs. So I mean, there's a whole other conversation maybe, but the idea that the services, the limited services that do exist, have a time limit on them is it's
Hmm.
outrageous. Like, what? Why would you give a child support with a timeline and a time limit. Like, here's your support, but it's going to expire when you're 21.
Yeah.
So good luck.
And again, I'm laughing, but it's no laughing matter.
I know.
I'm laughing because it's so ludicrous,
Yeah,
right? It makes no sense. That's not how
exactly.
human beings work,
No.
right? And you know that better than I do. So it's just wow. You know, there's a lot in the system that needs to improve.
Yeah.
But I think to your point, and you made a great point previously, we need to involve the people who are most infected. And the
Hmm.
parents and the families that have to live through this are the most affected. And they
Hmm.
need to be included in the discussion. They need to have a seat at the table. And more important, they need to have a voice in the table. And more importantly than that, they need to be heard and understood,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
That's really what this is about. You know, there's no way that anybody from the top or anybody sitting away from the table who's never experienced this can really understand and deal with this. And I'm one of those as well. I can't understand what you're going through. I may have, you know, all of the compassion and emotion. I'm so connected with what you're saying, but there's no way I can make myself believe that I know what you're going through. You have to have lived it to know it. You have to have lived it.
Yeah. Like in anything, the greatest asset in moving forward is the people that have walked it. So
Yeah.
our greatest asset are these parents. Like, we need the families to lead this march, but we also need people like yourself. So don't sell yourself short either. Like, you're listening to help make the action, and we need more people like that too.
Yeah. Thank you. But I think it's one avenue. I think at the end of the day, you know, all that really matters, I think for me, and I know other listeners may have different ideas, is I just want the pain to go away. I want parents, I want these families, I want the kids, I want you, I want you to be supported, because I just don't like it. I don't like sleeping at night knowing that there's no support for these incredible families, like your family that are going through so much. And I don't like having to click the end button, you know.
Mhm.
And I've had that experience in many cases in the podcast where, you know, I just didn't want to click the end button because I didn't know what was going to happen after that.
Right.
And there have been some cases where it got worse after the podcast. And in a you know, it's just hard. It's hard to, you know, for me to even put that down, because
Mhm.
you once you know, you know, you're part of it. You know,
Yes.
it's not something that's happening to you directly, but you're part of it. This
Yeah.
is, you know, your family, your extended family, the co-parents, you know, neighbors, you know, friends, you know,
Yeah.
it's all around you. And you know, it's something you just can't walk away from. So I'm hoping, you know, for a lot of listeners, that they can, you know, first of all, I'd like to congratulate any listener that's been listening to this, because, you know, by listening, you know, they're being part of the solution. By
Mhm.
incorporating into their world, they're being part
Yes.
of the solution. And I think we're going to end up eventually, uh, I would like to say in our lifetime, developing and institutionalizing the third choice.
Yes. I hope so. That's certainly my goal, and it seems I don't know. I'm telling myself it's part of why I'm here. So
There we
I
go.
think it's
It's
I
good.
think it's one of my life missions. So um I mean, I have to believe that it's all that pain is for a bigger purpose, right?
Yeah.
And but you make an interesting point with how even having these conversations has affected you,
Mhm.
and that collateral damage is everywhere,
Yeah.
um, but also preventable.
Absolutely. Absolutely. With the third choice in place,
Yeah,
with the proactive
yeah,
solution in place where they know that these services may or may not be needed, but at least they're
mhm,
prepared for them. They're watching out for them.
yes,
It's huge.
yeah,
Thank you
exactly.
so much. This is awesome. Thank you so
Thank
much for your
you.
perspective.
Yeah,
Appreciate it.
that's great. I'm so proud and pleased to be a part of it.
Yes. The silence is a deadly killer. The silence fosters alienation, pain, and hurt. The silence is deafening. It's flooding my ears, my thoughts, my heart with the voices of those families that suffer in silence. The silence is bombarding me now. I cannot be silent anymore, not after experiencing this with the families. I cannot be patient anymore, hoping the problem goes away. I cannot be complacent anymore, knowing that their plight is society's plight. Their pain is our collective pain. Their story is our story. I cannot accept the silence anymore. Parents and families need to be recognized for what they are living through with child violence and aggression. We need to put in place adequate support to elevate the parent-child relationship. We need to elevate the matter to justice and public health. This issue is a silent monster. If we deal with it, we may very well be uplifting our future with less violence in society, in addition to taking care of our present families. I would love to say that these families' experiences are singular, that it is uncommon. But research has shown that to be completely otherwise. And that is why You Matter podcasts on CVA or child violence and aggression is here. And that's why you're going to hear stories that differ, yet are just as horrific. Let's bring this deadly silence to an end. Let's come together, families, communities, support workers, justice, public health, and mental health, to provide these incredible families with the support and validation they need to weather their children's storm, so we can help bring their children back into the light and love of their arms. Thank you for being here, for opening your ears, your thoughts, and your hearts for them. For they are your neighbors, your brothers and sisters, your friends, your clients. Above all, they represent the most courageous of us, to live what they live and still work towards a place of love. Thank you for showing them why they matter.
I'll never be the same.